recording. All right, so recording's in progress. So welcome everyone to our monthly VANOMA Spotlight. And today we have a great guest. We're going to feature a great guest, Willie Cooper. Many of you know him, worked with him, met him. He's a great colleague. He's a principal at Clark Nexsen, a graduate of Virginia Tech. He just told me he graduated when I was born. So I was like, he's been in the profession for, as long as I've been alive. So that's great. But, he's our principal at Clark Nexsen, as many of you know. Like I said, he's a member of our board of directors here at VANOMA, and we're very fortunate to have it, because he's a great contributor with great insight to our mission here at VANOMA. So what we're going to do is that we're going to go ahead and let Willie present, and we're going to, if you have any questions, you can post them in the chat if you're too shy. But if you have any questions, we ask you to save them till the end. We're going to have a spot for Q&A, and it's, so you can ask many questions. As long as Will is willing to stay here, you can ask many questions as you want. And you can post them in the chat if you're shy about asking them. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Willie so he can tell us his life story and his professional highlights. Go ahead, Willie.
All right, so thanks for inviting me to tell my story this evening. I'll try not to be too boring. I was really inspired by a lot of the other spotlights that we've had this year. So rather than just read my resume, I thought I'd take some time and really reflect on the last 4 decades. And that turned out to be a really rewarding experience for me. So I hope you all enjoy it too. So I broke my life into 4 chapters that are more or less chronological. And then I addressed 10 important lessons that I think define me as an architect. So here we go. So this is my work history. I enjoyed working at all of these firms, but no firm is everything to everybody all the time. So sometimes you have to move on to grow. So in any event, I was at 5 firms for 38 years of practice, and that's not too unusual. So I worked at CMSS twice, the second time for 11 years. And this is my 20th anniversary at Clark Nexsen. So I grew up as an Air Force brat. My father was a training instructor, which is commonly known as a drill instructor. And he brought that discipline home, but I didn't find it confining. I actually found it liberating. So we lived all over the United States, as well as Japan and Okinawa. Both of my parents were college educated, Virginia State and North Carolina A&T. So there was a lot of supplemental learning in my upbringing. So our lives were basically a geography lesson. And the sciences were a big deal during the summer times. So I was forever curious, asking millions of questions. And when I had a good question, my father would make me research the answer. So if we want to increase the number of minority architects, I think this is where we're losing a lot of them. Architects are a specific combination of artist and scientist, and that requires a considerable effort to nurture. So in most cases, I think a lot of minority children who have the mindset to be architects are never even identified. So, but that's probably a good time to do a commercial for our project pipeline, which is happening this year, July 18th through the 22nd. So we can help you with nurturing those young architects. I was always building models. My father would come home on Friday with an arm full, and I'd have them together by Monday. I think from this, I learned obviously how things go together, but I also learned how tabs and ribs and pins and all were used to reinforce the plastic. And I learned what materials had to be rubber, what materials had to be metal for durability. And I also gained surgical precision with the tools of modeling. So looking back, I think I was developing an intuition for structure and a respect for materiality. No matter how complex the models were, I would open the box, read the instructions, and then put them away and build a model from memory. I don't know why I did that. It's just an intuition. But I think this is a big reason why today, when I look at lines on a drawing, I see walls and steel and brick. It's very similar to when you're fluent in a language and you have to actually visualize and think in the language rather than translating it in real time. So I remember as a child saying I wanted to draw instructions when I grew up. So I actually looked into how you get to be a person to draw instructions. Not sure why I didn't pursue that, but it's pretty remarkable how many of my idiosyncrasies as a child would eventually define me as a professional. So Japan was a fascinating place to grow up. We lived in Japan and Okinawa for a total of 6 years, returning to Virginia in 1974 when I was 13. And I didn't realize until I was much older how my experiences in Japan had shaped my worldview. So my father entered the Air Force just 10 years after it was integrated. But on base, race was rarely an issue for us. It was certainly present, probably more so for my parents, but you know, we went to school, played little league, did all those things with you know, not just whites, but with many races. And on base, the cultural partitions were mostly defined by officers versus enlisted, as opposed to black versus white. So in 74, when we got back to the States, race was always the issue. It was very startling to us, and it impacted where you lived, who your friends were, what sport you played, what jobs you could get, and it even sort of impacted your future goals. I still wonder how many talented minorities believe their high school counselors when they were told they couldn't do things. So, which gets us to lesson number 1, which is discipline is liberating. Train your brain like it's a muscle, and kids should believe anything is possible. So at the end of this, we're going to have a period where we can have some questions, but I'll go ahead and answer the one that's probably in everyone's mind right now, which is, I have no idea what I was looking at. So anyway, chapter 2, I call enlightenment, and that was going to tech. So I'm not sure how I ended up at Virginia Tech. Maybe it was destiny, but I sort of think it might have just been chance. I wanted to be a motorcycle mechanic on a racing team, but my father insisted I graduate first. So My sister actually filled out the application. Whoops, sorry about that. Yeah, my sister actually filled out the application, and she thought I might like architecture, which is interesting because now she swears out she doesn't remember even doing that. So it's totally chance. Admittedly, my family was a bit skeptical about me surviving any university. To date, I hadn't shown any interest in academics. I love to learn, just not in a classroom. So when I got to Tech in 1979, there were 21,000 students and only 300 Blacks. I think we were African Americans at that time. There were only 4 of us in the architecture program. But that didn't really impact me because, you know, I was used to being an extreme minority. I'd been one for most of my life. So I always had a confidence that I could overcome race. I suppose my upbringing kind of contributed to that worldview that racism was less about individual whites people, and it was more about sort of an ingrained system of apartheid. But then again, I was convinced that I could short circuit that system. So, you know, as I've grown older and I like to think wiser, I realized that I underestimated racism, but I gained some satisfaction tilting at the windmills. So, you know, when I wrote that down, I actually was thinking how that sounds so despondent, but sometimes having something to push against can really be liberating. So anyway. So from the beginning, I was drawn to order, particularly spatial order. I was always fascinated with how things go together and discovering proper relationships with one another. So the people I idolized growing up weren't architects, so I never associated myself with the profession. And during my first year or first quarter of design lab, it became obvious to me that my instincts and passions were architectural. So for most people, that first few weeks of architecture school is disorienting. But for me, it was clarifying. You know, I was an architect. So I was very comfortable expressing myself and my ideas three-dimensionally. My first year professor would always say he is already an architect. However, my instructors were frustrated that there were no sketches, no breadcrumbs left to validate my journey. Of course, they weren't there all night, so they didn't see my modeling successes were basically a combination of experience, focus, and a pretty refined process, even at that point in my development. And rather than documenting my process with unsuccessful iterations, I would just recycle them immediately. So they would go right back into the project. So in any event, no one back there then had a cell phone with a camera. I sometimes think now if I could have recorded the process, it would have been a fascinating video sketch. But fortunately, one of the upperclassmen offered to photograph a few of my models. Otherwise, they would have been lost forever in time. So I worked one decision at a time without the obligation of a concept. I practiced a kind of architectural improvisation, probably inspired by my fascination with jazz music. it just seemed natural to me to feel my way through the design. Later, as an architect, this improvisational method became a fast track superpower. So many of my school projects were what I call physical imagining. So my models flowed freely from literal to figurative to representational, all in one model. I was always of two minds. One was analytical, the other creative. And I kind of evolved those two sides into what I call designing with informed imagination. I would begin the design with research, gaining a deeper understanding of the priorities of the project, and sort of looking for that point of departure on which to focus my imagination. So I never found a comfortable home as a Hokie. I resented the school's Eurocentric focus, probably due to my growing up in the Far East. And frankly, I didn't want to be a white African-American architect. In all fairness, the faculty tried very hard to reach out to me. They even tried to connect me with several prominent minority architects. Frankly, at the time, though, I didn't think I needed the school's ideas to be good at this. But I realized almost immediately upon graduation that I had wasted an important opportunity to improve myself. So I was grateful later on that the School of Architecture decided it was time for us to go our separate ways. And eventually they said, we've done all we can do for you. Now you need to get the hell out of here. So the truth is, sometimes it's more satisfying to fight than to work for progress. And as a young guy, I think there was a lot of that in me. But you know, if we want to make progress, it'll happen a lot sooner if at some point we become a partner in building bridges to like a shared future. So that brings us to lesson number 2. I left school with a commitment to never again allow negatives to distract me from the positives. So chapter 3 was a refocusing after the turbulent chapter 2. So on to brighter days. So I went to a talk, it was several Tuskegee Airmen, and the leadership of the 332nd Fighter Group knew that if they followed the white pilots, they would shoot down some airplanes, but they wouldn't change racial stereotypes back home. So the 332nd, also known as the Red Tails, adopted tactics of maintaining very strict discipline. They would chase German fighters through the bomber formations, but they would break off their pursuit and reform over the bombers so that they could fend off subsequent attacks. So those tactics were so successful that the 332nd became the escort of choice with the white bomber squadrons. So after hearing that whole story, and I guess it hit me because I already loved airplanes. I grew up knowing pilots, so it really impacted me, and I adopted that strategy to architecture. I focused on things that the client really wants, which are hard work, dependability, competence, honesty, and a commitment to the goals of the project. And as it turns out, clients valued this approach to services much more than they worried about a minority running their project. So that's lesson number 3. This is a big one. Focus on the job, not the glory. So on to chapter 4, which is the practice. So when I graduated in 1984, I sat right down in front of a computer, and I immediately understood and appreciated the power of automation. It was amazing to me that the average toothbrush was designed with a more technologically advanced process than most buildings. So programming to me is the ultimate design challenge. It's complex and analytical, and yet fascinatingly creative. And it's kind of interesting. This is something I wrote in my sketchbook, but because the art of programming is necessarily balanced by analytics, it naturally builds a discipline into the innovative process. And I think that kind of says it all. And so lesson number 4, I believe programming is the best way to teach design. So architecture is a demanding profession. So the people that you choose to be on your team will ultimately have a big impact on your success. There are long hours, lots of stress, and the money is not fantastic. So at home, you need a partner who has realistic expectations and is aware of the eccentricities of a creative mind. And this is my wife, Maria, of 35 years. So maybe I've moved around to a lot of firms, but I've only had one wife. So drop the mic. Many firms staff teams to cover weaknesses rather than reinforce strengths. And many of the problems minorities face in the office environment are magnified in a team setting. Still, teams are essential. So even small projects require working with groups. So teaming is an essential skill to nurture as a young architect. So, and that gets us to lesson number 5, which is that architecture is a team sport. So now we'll hit a couple of actual projects. This was the Martin Agency, and it was interesting because the Martin Agency was full of 400 of the most creative people in the country. And they were a seriously fun group of people to play with. If you don't know, the Martin Agency is an ad agency. However, it also led to quite a roller coaster ride of a project with never a dull moment. And I could literally do an hour on that project. Some of the things are so outrageous, but it was fun. So I was always amazed how companies didn't seem to even notice my race, or at least they didn't openly notice it. and it's intriguing that in 1996, clients didn't react to a 35-year-old Black kid being their architect, especially considering what the stakes were for a lot of the projects I was doing. So still, though, as a minority, there are in this business, there are some pretty surreal experiences, like standing in Shaco Plaza and looking basically at the building you see in the photo there. And I realized that 150 years ago, that was the center of shipping for the Confederate States of America. So you're constantly reminded of the past and the present and many things, and you just kind of have to take all of that in stride. So this project was public housing renovation. Diggstown was a project in Norfolk, Virginia, and it was literally a war zone. It was the worst neighborhood in Norfolk. And it was just a really dangerous place for residents, and it was a pretty gloomy existence. So we were working with our design partners, Ray Gendros at UDA Architects, and we normalized the housing project so that it felt much more like for sale residential development. We also added access to all of the different spaces in the neighborhood so that it was safe, both for residents and for police. We did find out that most of the arrests that happen for crime in Diggstown were people who didn't live there. And also the way that the buildings were laid out created areas that the cops could not get backup in a reasonable amount of time. So it was basically too dangerous to patrol. So we fixed all those things. And by the way, Ray's an amazing guy. If you don't know him, he's definitely somebody who you might want to get to know. So so our work literally changed people's lives. Residents were proud of their neighborhood. One kid told me, I don't live in the projects anymore. So until this job, I hadn't really felt the true power of architecture. This wasn't making a developer richer or creating a chic place for, young people to go have a drink or hang out. This was fundamentally changing people's lives for the better. So anyway, that gets us to lesson 6, which is architecture is a powerful force. So many years ago, I wrote an observation in my sketchbook that there's a qualitative difference between digital and analog thinking. When we think digitally, we are focused on the starting point and the ending point of the line. When we work in an analog manner, the journey between the start and the end point is a chance to focus on what that line really is. So obviously, I really believe in modeling. I really believe in an analog to approach to some of the design work with buildings. So and you can tell when a client looks at a rendering, they say, okay, yeah, that looks fine. On the other hand, if you set a model down in front of them, they'll play with it for an hour. So there's just something different in how we interface with physical things as opposed to digital. So these models were were studies for the Village Center at the University of Utah, which was the site of the 2002 Winter Olympics. Working at Hanbury Evans, I made a lot of physical study models. Actually, we did digital and physical study models. So that gets us to lesson 7, which is physical models are still relevant. And there you see the finished product. I always thought it was really cool how much that looks like the models that we worked up. So I also got the opportunity on to work on several campuses in Florida with Hanbury Evans, and the academic villages at the University of Central Florida was a living learning community, and the biggest academic housing project that Florida had done at that time. So we used a lot of both physical and digital models in the design process. And I think if you look at the images that you see on the screen, the buildings actually have a model-y character to them. They actually look like models. So that was very fun. So I included the project here because it was the first time that I was free to render the buildings I was doing with aggressive color. So in Eurocentric architecture, color has been largely ignored, but color has always been central to the expression of peoples who fall under the African diaspora. So I guess for me, this might be a hint of an African-American style. So when our landlord of 30 plus years, our being Clark Nexsen's, decided that they were going to lease to doctors instead of large A&E firms, Clark Nexsen was facing being homeless. So we welcomed Amada Hoffler's invitation to join the town center community. The only catch was that we had to design and build a 450,000 square foot mixed use facility in just 18 months. I had been talking to our CEO about a big project mindset and how fast track was a sort of a different process than other delivery methods that we were more accustomed to working in. And of course, I also talked about how essential it is with large projects to keep the focus on the job and not the glory. But still, I was very surprised when I was told that I was going to be the architect for this project. So I knew it would be tough. But to be honest with you, I could pretty clearly visualize how to make it happen. So I wasn't that intimidated by the schedule. So I think architects are generally trained to begin with the big idea. However, if you study the ultra fast track project, the structure drives the critical path. So if you can get the contractor moving on the structure, and there's pretty much a pretty generous window to focus on design. So it would be nearly impossible to work as fast as we worked on this project without improvisation. We were in construction well before there was ever even a settled notion of concept. And interestingly, since we were kind of focusing on the building sort of in the order that the contractor was building it, it became inherently integrated in how we designed it. So the architectural leadership of the Virginia Beach offices didn't agree on how a project like this should be approached. And I didn't have time to convince them otherwise. So sometimes you have to choose between being successful and being terminated. So it's one of those things where if you believe you're right, roll with it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, the project went incredibly well. Amada Hoffler used to joke that they had never done a major project where the superintendent and the lead architect were best friends at the end of the job. So, and we actually even opened the building a month early. So early concepts on the new Beachford showroom facility were pretty aggressive architecturally. You can see that on the screen. That's a model of the concept. And Mr. Barton called a meeting, and he spent 45 minutes basically ripping us a new one. He kept saying that Beachford was white, and I was frankly taking that wrong. But I was trying to decide whether to just walk out of the meeting and tell him CN could appoint a white architect to revise the design. But instead, I decided to be patient, and I just asked, okay, you don't like this, what do you like? And we spent the next couple of weeks working directly with Mr. Barton to define his vision. In the end, we improved the design because it was what I call colloquially iconic, meaning it's much more accessible to the average person. And I realized after a little research that Ford dealers were traditionally painted Ford blue, which actually Ford blue is a Pantone color. It's trademarked, and it's an actual blue color, and white. So Mr. Barton was reacting to how dark the rendering was when he kept repeating that Beachford is white. So he was actually correctly pointing out that the initial design that we brought forward sort of lacked a Ford identity. So as a minority, it can be very hard not to be sensitive. It just kind of goes with the territory, but you have to learn to hear what people say and then confirm what they actually mean before reacting too strongly. So this gets us to lesson number 8, which is it's not always about race. So be patient. So on the left is the revised design, or as I call it, the Mr. B design. I think the new design drew pretty heavily on the beach house concept, and the result of a lot of long conversations about the best way to present automobiles. A few years later, we added the service intake area to the showroom. which is the picture on the right. I think that's, yeah. So anyway, Beachport had their marketing people do all the graphics in the building, and it's example of how an image conscious owner always demanding high quality work and what can happen. So there are no great projects without great clients. The best clients believe in the power of architecture, and obviously they're typically very demanding. Like in this case where Beach Ford came to me and said they needed a car wash, but not just any car wash. So this this project actually got out of control because we just kept having discussions about what would make a car wash a better experience. And you know, each time we did that, we got further and further out there, but it turned out to be a pretty spectacular building, actually. So lesson 9, the best clients elevate your work. So I've learned so much about risk riding a really, really fast motorcycle. Proper preparation, building up to difficult task, learning how to make, or learning how to be decisive under a lot of pressure. All of those things can reduce your risk, whether you're on the road or you're on a site. To reach your potential, you're going to have to work outside the box. I've seen so many minorities fall short because they were too careful. So, but that doesn't mean take chances. I always say chances are luck. A risk is a calculated exposure to liability or a problem. So you always want to take risks. You don't ever want to leave stuff to chance. So, but if you're not exposing yourself to risk, then you're probably not reaching your potential. So lesson number 10 is to understand risk. So those are my my 10 lessons. Sure, there were significantly more than 10 lessons in 4 decades of work. But I picked the ones that I feel kind of most impacted who I am as an architect and how I practice. So I also realized most of the issues I've discussed here are intertwined with race. That's because this is a NOMA event. So obviously we all have a certain perspective on that. But it's important to realize that just because the world sees you first as a Black, brown, or female person does not mean that you have to see yourself that way. So you have to know yourself and work tirelessly at reaching your potential. And believe me, eventually that is what will define you. Of course, being a minority does come with implicit obligations. I believe the worst thing that a minority can do is close a door of opportunity behind them. And I'm at a point now in my career where, worst case, expressing my opinion might lead to an early retirement. But what I always do is I always consider the potential for collateral damage uh, to the people coming behind me. So, and I think we owe that to each other. So that's kind of it. That's a quick tour of 40 years of what's been a really fun time. So
Thank you, Willie. Thank you for sharing your story. And thank you for everybody coming out tonight to listen to Willie's story. I work with him. I get to talk to him all the time. So, I've talked to him many times on many of these topics. So I want to open up the floor to everyone here to ask some questions. You have your hand up?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I thought we were doing, like in
Yeah, sure.
school.
Go ahead.
Raise it. Okay. Thank you, Will. 40 years and 40 minutes. That's pretty impressive. I think there's probably like each one of those points you had an opportunity to do something that, right. You took a left or a right. Is there
Yeah.
somewhere back in there where you said, "Damn it, I should have gone right instead of left"? Is there a regret? Is there a turn you didn't make that you wish you had?
I think anyone who tells you that that they did it all right, they're lying. That's just not the way it works. But I kind of don't look at it as going left or right. It's like there's a different journey to the left and there's a different journey to the right. So if you make the left decision, then you have to be willing to commit to being on the left. If you make the right decision, then you have to commit to being on the right. So I think that I can honestly say that with the decisions that I made, I went in 110% and made them the best they could be. So could I have made better decisions? Could I have made my life easier? I think to all of those things, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. And if I could just, did I see that you interned in Detroit in a firm in Detroit? Did I catch that right?
Yeah. I actually worked for Sims Varner.
Okay.
Yeah. And that would be a good answer to your first question.
Okay.
I left there because I couldn't see myself in Detroit. And despite what you may be thinking, I absolutely love the place, but I couldn't handle the weather.
Okay.
Everybody thinks of Detroit as a rough and tumble place, and find yourself in the wrong on the wrong street, and that's certainly true. But I love that city. I love being there. My wife is from Detroit. I love going back. So it holds a special place in my heart, but I can't handle all that snow. So that would be the first one. I think if I had stayed there, I would have had a different career in life and the focus would have been different.
Thanks for sharing. I really appreciate it, man.
Yep. Thanks for the question.
Anybody else have any questions, comments for Willie? I don't see anything in the chat, but I have a question for you, Willie. So, I mean, over your long career, Bert kind of touched on it. I was kind of gonna go there with the decisions you have made. Now, what has been your, I know say you worked on many different projects throughout your career. What is there a project that you call your favorite, one that kind of stands out? I know you kind of share a few with us, but is there one that kind of stands out that you're most proud of, I guess?
I think project is I think the work that I did while I was programming was pretty out there. In fact, we were working on a CAD system called Eris, and they were mini computers. I know a lot of you don't know what that is, but and they kind of got cut, when everybody switched over to desktop computers, and they all went to AutoCAD. Then a lot of the big, robust CAD softwares found themselves, out in the cold. And Eris was one of those. But some of the stuff that we were doing with the programming was pretty amazing. But I would say my favorite client would would actually be Beach Board. The projects aren't that large, but they're really invested in it, and you really get to push those very tight limits to the max. So I really enjoy working with those guys. So yeah, I think we're on the 4th project with those guys now.
Amazing. Anybody else have any questions or comments for Willie? On his
Kelly has a question.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Hey, Willie, I just wanted to know, since you grew up with the military family, do you find a lot of international influence in your architecture because you got to live and see so many different places growing up?
It's funny because I always say, I was talking to some guys here, and I said, I'm not sure I've ever done a building that reflected me. Because I'm one of those guys who adopts the client's goals. So yeah, I'm not a guy that's out there representing a style or that kind of thing. It's kind of a mix. So I guess
Maybe growing up around so many different people is probably what gives you that ability to adapt to clients too.
Yeah, it's possible. I think the biggest thing that you get, like, I'll never forget the time when we went to Okinawa, and my mom and my sister and I fly across the world, and we land at a place where the only thing we know there is my dad. So he shows up in this Japanese car. I don't even know what it was. It's like a little Datsun or something. And I was used to seeing him in his 56 Buick, which was huge. So he showed up in this little car, and then we hop in the car and we kind of drive through these roads that kind of snake around, and it just hit me how, okay, everything's different. The sun looked like it was in a different place. The temperature, the feel was different. The smell was different. The vegetation was different. The food was different. And I think that experience of walking out of a door and everything's different, and you have to like build your understanding of your environment again. I would say that was the biggest gift that I feel like I got from being in a lot of different places. You don't take anything for granted.
That's really interesting. Kind of avoiding a comfort zone. You kind of became your own comfort zone.
Yeah, it's kind of ruined vacations for me. Because I don't want to go somewhere and live in a facade for 2 weeks or 2 days or a weekend. I want to go there and it's like, all right, you got to make this work now. And because you're going to be here for 2 years or 3 years. So yeah.
Great. Awesome. Well, we coming
have
up
a
to,
comment, if I
somebody have
can.
a question? Anybody else? Ramon?
I have a comment. First of all,
Hey.
greetings from Philadelphia.
Hey, Ramon, how are you?
Good, Willie, how are you?
Good.
Just wanted to say, I'm sorry I only caught like half of your, I only caught 20 minutes of the 40 minutes, but what I heard sounds really interesting, and I just want to say thank you for sharing that. It's really cool.
You're welcome.
I like the lessons.
Yeah, it looks a little bit different touch
Yeah,
right
that was
there.
Yeah, it was really fun doing it, because most of us don't think of our life that way. But as I started to kind of put stuff in place, and I'm like, holy crap, that's why I do that. So it was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
very cool.
Anybody else have any more questions or concern? We're coming up to 8 o'clock. I know some people are putting, thanking you on the chat. And I want to say, it was your story was very inspiring. Like I said, I'm still getting my own experience, but like I hope to someday go get to that point and look back at a long story career and all the projects you got a chance to do, all the people you got a chance to work with. So that's very inspiring. So I feel like I'm still going up, but I'm gonna reach my peak at some point and start coming down.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that point. Because I still feel like I'm still learning. Like I don't. I don't consider myself an expert in anything yet, but
Yeah. Well, one thing I can say is you never know where you're going to be tomorrow.
Right.
I'm working along doing one thing, and the next thing I know, I'm doing something totally way out there. So it's been fun.
Absolutely.
And Willie, I was going to say the 12 years that we worked together, I think I learned more in this last 40 minutes than in those 12 years. We were just so busy just doing the work at the time, but definitely encouraging. Yeah. And I didn't realize you worked at Mosley Architects as well.
Yep.
So was that in the beach or in
the beach,
In the
not
beach.
in
Okay.
Richmond.
Okay.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of going to Richmond when I went to Clark Nexsen. So
Okay. Very good. So we've worked at least 2 places together and then a couple places adjacent to each other. So
that's right.
Yep. Cool.
It's it's a small community
It is.
in this area, so it's pretty cool.
Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome.
Very nice.
All right, guys, but it's 8 o'clock. We hit the hour mark. If anybody else, I'm gonna last call for any questions before we end tonight's event. Any questions? Last call.
I'm gonna maybe ask one more question. I've talked to Willie about this before, but could you elaborate to the group what you mean by focus on the job and not the glory?
I think for so many of us, and frankly, this is not a black or white thing. I think everybody sometimes gets ahead of themselves, and they're trying to win awards and make a name for themselves, rather than being worried about doing a really good job on the project. So when you focus on the job, 9 times out of 10, the outcome is better anyway. So I think going back to the red tails, a lot of the fighters, at that time, white fighters, they would chase the planes through the formations and then they would keep chasing them. So they were all aces and they shot down a lot of planes, but the bombers, when they kept chasing them, the bombers were sitting ducks because they didn't have any fighter protection. So that's an example of how you can be really good at your job a really skilled pilot and it's meaningless. Because a skilled pilot who's off chasing one plane, right, to get a kill means nothing if 4 or 5 bombers go down while he's doing that. So, and a lot of times that can happen to you in architecture. You get too tied up with what's not really important. And if you want to break all barriers, whether you're a female or a minority, clients will jump all over you if you can accept their priorities, accept their goals, and then take that and work at resolving it and elevate it.
Well said. Well said. Great. All right, guys. But I want to thank all of you again. Thank Willie for taking the time for putting that presentation together, inspiring, and sharing your life and career work. And I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. And this video will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So if you know any colleagues that will be interested in, or if you want to watch it again, or if you know anybody that might be interested in watching it, we'll send a link out once it's posted. Again, we want to thank you guys for being here. And next month we'll be doing another spotlight. We still working on the guests for that one, but hopefully you can join us then. And like Willie mentioned earlier, Project Pipeline Camp is going to be in July 18th to the 22nd. So we're working digitally and getting that together and shaping the minds of the young kids into this great profession. So, we definitely are working on that and looking forward to having a great camp. So again, thank you all for being here, and until next time. Oh yeah, happy Juneteenth too. That's coming up. That's coming up. So we'll have the day off for that now. That's something new. That's something that wasn't around, Willie, when you started.
Hey, Joel, also real quick. Now that I'm not sharing, I see my wife is on here. I don't think she can talk, but I just wanted to thank her for all those 40 years.
Right. You can't do whatever you better have, right?
Yep.
All right, guys. But say happy Juneteenth, and I hope you enjoy the festivities for that. If they're happening in your town or here around Richmond, there's a few celebrations going on. So I'm definitely going to take part in those festivities. So like I said, enjoy the rest of your night and enjoy the rest of your week. And we're looking forward to seeing you at our next spotlight. Have a good night.
All right. We'll see you.
All right, Willie. Thanks a lot, man.
You're welcome. Enjoyed it.